The next speaker is John Waters, who's founder, chairman and chief executive officer of iSIGHT Partners, which is a Dallas-based cyber intel firm. John's been a respected entrepreneur and investor in the cybersecurity industry for many years. He was the chairman and CEO of iDefense, which I think, was that the company you sold to VeriSign, John? Yep, it was the company he sold to VeriSign back in 2005. He's been an early investor, board member of Archer. He's served on over 20 corporate boards, early investor of ThreatGrid. The list just goes on and on. I can't go through all of this. Really interesting thing about John is that he's actually got a finance and economics background, so he's not coming from the technical side. He's a true businessman. He's seen the opportunity to help, as per my opening introduction around the amount of money that's at risk with cybersecurity and the amount of money that companies and governments are prepared to spend to protect their risks. I'd like to welcome to the stage, coming all the way from the US, John Waters.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Am I live here? Great. Well, appreciate your attention. Thank you for the invite and the nice introduction. Yeah, this is a little different than many of the other speeches you've heard that are talking about, the capability of adversaries, all the exposures you have, and all the things to worry about in cyberspace. I thought it was quite comical that the juxtaposition of all of that evil with the song of happy going on in the background was pretty cool. But so I'm going to talk about really how we shape this industry in a way that gives us an advantage over the adversary. Now we can elevate the role of security to a core business function and a core risk function in our enterprises and governments. Because what's happened as we've seen the industry evolve, and I'll give you just a bit about iSIGHT Partners. So iSIGHT Partners I started in 2006. Saw a real change in the industry. As was mentioned, early investors in Archer, which is kind of enterprise security management. iDefense was a technical, tactical intelligence organization, primarily like patching prioritization. Tipping Point was the early move from IDS to IPS. And then when all those businesses and industries really got acquired in the early to mid-2000s, the industry started to bifurcate. So it went through a period to where security was a noun, it was becoming an adjective. It was something you did. So the MSSs were bought by the telecoms, you had secure communications, you had Microsoft going into the OS, with secure apps like personal firewalls and things. So Symantec goes into storage, secure storage. You've got the routing companies saying, well, okay, I'm Juniper, I can't compete with Cisco in the core routing business, so I'll go buy an IPS and call it secure routing. It became just something you did. And a lot of the security infrastructure became managed by the core IT environment and companies, and there was this evolving move that I was, really keen onto with NetWitness around how do you find advanced threats that create the biggest impact to your organization from within inside the organization. And I set out to build iSIGHT Partners in 2006 to help find advanced threats from outside your organization. And the tagline on the card and the website is iSIGHT Partners Security Beyond the Edge. So we're going to walk through the transformation in the industry that's afoot as we shift from a technology-led approach to an intelligence-led approach to managing security and the benefits that comes from that approach. Okay, so the environment we sit in today is not good for CISOs. The average shelf life of a CISO in the United States is 16 months. That is not job security. So if you're looking for a CISO job, you're being recruited in the United States, make sure you get a great exit package before you ever take it. Because the likelihood is it's not going to be very long, unless you pay attention to this discussion and refine your communication skills. Because the reason the shelf life is so short is not because there's lack of competent people managing security organizations, it's because there's lack of competent communicators, and there's this major communication chasm between security organizations and the leadership of the business organizations. Business people speak in terms of risk, in terms of economics, in terms of finance, in terms of market opportunity. They don't talk in terms of pandas and flying, horses and kittens and things like that. So you've really got to be careful in terms of how you characterize risk from a security organization to the business so you come off as credible and not someone out there trying to create another fear-monger strategy that was kind of the early age of cyber. So you clearly have to understand the adversary piece as we're going to go through this, but you need to be able to characterize it in terms of risk to the business, not about the bad guys are coming at me, because they've heard an awful lot of that. It's getting old. So the expanding attack surface, as Inbar really went through and gave us great insight, there's so many ways to attack someone. Physical, electronic, human, weaknesses everywhere, exploding environment, the Internet of Things. Anybody that sets out in the morning to secure everything they have is running a fool's game. It's impossible. So you have to limit your efforts and your energy around things that create viable risk to your business. So go back to the traditional discipline of risk. Threat times vulnerability times consequence. So as you're thinking about your careers, how do you plug into one or all of those functions to really become a risk manager for the organization? And then we put a little economic spin in there. How much risk per dollar can you manage? You have dollars going into your security organization that is intended to manage risk to the business. How are you deploying those security dollars in a way to achieve that objective? Okay, so it's a very simple concept. So awful lot of protection investments have been made. A lot of people call it, security in depth. A lot of people call it expense in depth. It's more the financial side. But you've layered technology into the environment for the most part. Now it's how you manage it will define you as a risk manager and will define you as a security leader that can connect to the business, bridging that security chasm. Awful lot of chaos that's come out of all this instrumentation in your environment. I doubt there is a company in the world or an entity in the world that has less critical security events than they have time to deal with. They're not sitting around and say, well, I only got one critical alert this week and I had time to deal with 5. It's the exact opposite. So our average customer would have 1,000 critical alerts a day and they have time to deal with 5 or 10. So law of scarce resources, economics, how do you pick the right 10? How do you pick the right 5? How do you pick the right 1? Right, so that integration between intelligence, threat indicators and incident indicators will define whether you're an efficient risk manager for the organization. Right, so that's what you want to be able to hold out to your executive team, is I am managing more risk per dollar than any of my peer group because I used everything available to me to make the best incremental decision. I was with a customer last week on the West Coast and said, well, I am the hero in the company because I don't go asking for more money, other than those things that will help me make better decisions. So I can effectively manage more risk per dollar than my peer group, and that's what the board likes to hear. So it's kind of a wise to we've had a good economy recently, but if the economy turns ugly, you better be able to make better decisions because you're not going to get more capital to throw at the problem. So a lot of chaos, all kinds of security tools, severe breaches continue, and they've accelerated. So the current industry position, layered defense, all kinds of technologies in your environment, focused 2 inches in front of your face. So where's my perimeter and how do I protect everything within that perimeter? Ingress and egress. We've seen how futile that effort that is. Certainly seen the breaches come from it. There's an awful lot of FUD, the fear, uncertainty, and doubt. That's why I said I would encourage you not to start preaching about the bad guys are coming, unless you can put it in a container of risk that's understandable. And every vendor out there says they do security intelligence in one way, shape, or form. The RSA conference in the spring in San Francisco, if there were 30,000 people there and 5,000 booths, 90% of them said something about intelligence. So it's this kind of bastardized term now. Hopefully after today you understand more of what it is. So when you start expanding your view, saying, okay, it's not just about me and what's 3 inches in front of my face, all the instrumentation of my devices, there's attack methods that are being executed against you, and there's command and control infrastructure, Tor nodes, exfiltration routes, botnets, all kinds of adversaries' infrastructure. So how do you start expanding your view? What a lot of the early 1.0 focus was on compliance and regulation. That was a win. Are you compliant with PCI? Are you compliant with ABC that is relevant to your industry? If yes, you're a winner. If not, you're a loser. It's kind of the defined mantra. Today that's over. In 2.0, understanding the threat environment you operate in allows you to make good risk decisions for your business. But it's not enough just to try to figure out what you're connected to and what methods they are, because you got to understand what the intent is of the adversary. It's not necessarily who they are, true name, identity, where they live, what building they operate in. It's just understanding that persona and what their intent is. Because without intent, you really don't understand what the impact is. In the risk equation, threat, vulnerability, impact. So if you think of people who could go in and break into your house, if they're going to go kill your family and burn it down, that's different than if they're going to steal, the letters on your desk. Okay, so same method, but different impact. So adversary informs impact, core to the risk equation. But you really have to look at the entire ecosystem. Threat sources, using threat methods, to create effect to your enterprise, it's a zero-sum game. Their gain is your pain, the other way around. So there's the entire ecosystem slide. So the way we're organized as a business is by different domains: cyber espionage, crime, hacktivism, enterprise, et cetera. So starting off to understand motivation, intent, and capability. Give you a size of scale. So since we started the business in 2006, scaled it, invested over $100 million, built operations in 16 countries, covering 56 threat source countries in 24 languages. Truly global. And this is interesting. You see 40% of the world's banking Trojans created out of Brazil. And as Amnon spoke about earlier, they just export it, right? That's just their business. They're good at something, they export it. Little towns and little countries. Small town in Romania, up near Transylvania, because we could call them the vampires. Those guys are focused on e-tailers. It's most of the economy of the little town. Their tools and tradecraft are all around targeting e-tailers. So it is truly a global in nature problem set. So we cover about 16,000 adversaries, to give you an idea of scaling. When you see malware that goes up so dramatically, I know the Dan said the other day, Dan Wiley, 700,000 new signature type things are implemented a day into the checkpoint infrastructure. Well, there's only we track about 16,000 now. That's growing at about 200 a month, about 15%. It's kind of a manageable number in terms of number of new entrants into this space. Then when you connect that to playbooks, okay, these adversaries are all by domain. How many playbooks are there? I think in the last presentation you saw, a discrete set of capabilities and contained with one adversary has a certain number of target sets that they focus on. What do their playbooks look like? So that connects the adversary to the actual threat method, TTP, that they're trying to execute. And then fundamentally, that is interesting, but not actionable unless you've got a technical indicator that connects something you see in your environment to the actual threat adversary and their capability. So when you see a piece of malware connected to an IP range, you say, oh, okay, that is this capability being expressed by this group, and here's what they're trying to do. Now you have the risk equation. You got the threat, you've got the impact, and now you say, am I vulnerable to that or not? So rather than looking for all your assets and all your vulnerability, look for vulnerabilities in their attack vector, in your environment. So you say, okay, well, there's clear threat, it's executing against me, but they're exploiting this vulnerability in this product. If you're okay, then that is not as much of a risk to one that you may have an exposure to. Right? So trying to use threat to enforce the shrinking of the problem, which is ultimately what we're trying to do. So adversaries to methods to attack surface. The output of that, again, back to scaling, give you an idea. So we're looking at, well, this is kind of interesting. So now if you look at adversaries as the way you go, and you've got companies out there spending an awful lot of time and resource trying to figure out who these guys are, true identity, whether you should go after them legally or not. I mean, that's almost marketing because I'm not sure you can actually ever apply any legal pressure to a lot of these folks. But by the same token, adversary insight gives you this feeling of what can we do to get after these guys? So start off with saying what we'd all like to do, as a band of brothers and sisters in this community that we operate in as security. If we could all band up and go after them.
You read the Bible, Brett?
Yes.
Oh, there's this passage I got memorized. Sort of fits this occasion. Ezekiel 25:17. The path of the righteous man is beset on all sides by the iniquities of the selfish and the tyranny of evil men. Blessed is he who in the name of charity and goodwill shepherds the weak through the valley of darkness, for he is truly his brother's keeper and the finder of lost children. And I will strike down upon thee with great vengeance and furious anger those who attempt to poison and destroy my brothers. And you will know my name is the Lord when I lay my vengeance upon thee.
So let's talk about what we can actually do. Anybody seen Pulp Fiction? I'm sure there's a few. I saw some lips moving, quoting this when it's going on. Funny scene. In any event, so there's awful lots of things that you'd like to do outside the confines of the law, but none of us want to go to prison, so we got to follow the law. So the way we got to operate as an industry in an intelligence-led approach is to really know what the outcome is you're trying to achieve, and then figure out how to achieve that outcome. First and foremost, shrinking the problem allows you to right size your security organization to the problem you're up against, right? You got 1,000 critical alerts, you got time to deal with 10, pick the right 10, okay? So shrinking the problem is really key. If you got a new product or service that's coming into your environment that's gonna increase the noise, don't even consider it. Somehow you have to shrink the problem. It's already too big and it's just getting bigger, intentionally and purposely from the bad guys. Improve your prioritization, enable real proactivity, work on those things purposely and proactively before you create an event. So how do you get ahead of the curve? Enhance executive communications. A lot of people default into numbers, and I'll tell you, serving on 20 boards, the boards hate it. I blocked 40 million malware infections last month. Who the hell cares? What does that mean? If you say, here's my win of the month, you know, of all the things that we were up against last month, this one got pretty close. Through our investment that you gave me the resources to do in people process technology, we were able to detect and defeat this attack from this group that was trying to accomplish this objective. I showed the intel report to the general counsel. They said that would have been a $10 million problem. Thanks for the $1 million you gave me for that infrastructure. 10 to 1, right? So now you're starting to get the link between your investment in security and the actual impact you avoided. That is ROI that is enabled through an intelligence-led approach, and the communication is enabled through the context of the actual report. Okay, if you just have data, you're not going to be able to have that communication fulcrum, you know, inside your organization. Fundamentally, it is our mission. We're on a mission as well, but our mission is to connect security to the business, right? How you can integrate intelligence into your security technology and operations to align your organization with the business. Fundamentally what we do, it's a business function. So, I mean, I'm attracted to the intelligence business, not just because it's cool, but because it has a real value in terms of elevating the status of security organizations and helping us fight the fight that is near and dear to our country and our companies, and the only way we can compete effectively in the new age of cyber risk. So shrinking the problem, everybody has a different set of numbers, different set of technologies. Internally, you're trying to shrink it from inside the noisemakers of your infrastructure. And a lot of the technology vendors out there, and Checkpoint's one of them, does a good job, has an awful lot of tools and techniques to help you shrink this mammoth amount of noise down to something that's somewhat manageable. But the disconnect between what an output is from the top only and what your resource levels truly are is always going to be a mismatch. So if you can correlate in our world, that we've got people all over the world that process every day, people process technology at scale. We go through hundreds of thousands of things, pre-process about 50,000 pieces of malware, create about 500 intelligence wires, all built around the intelligence collection of our customer set, and generate about 20 intelligence reports that have about 100, 150 indicators. Okay, so if you've got the 700,000 things a day going into the infrastructure, things that have been seen that could be bad, there's about 0.2% of those, we say these are bad. And 100% of those link to the intelligence that relates to the indicator. So if you just have a bunch more indicators, it's data. If the indicator doesn't link to some analysis, you've got no way to inform your risk position, and therefore you really don't have an event prioritization that you have that you can work with, okay? So impact values are going to be core to your decisions on what to do next. So I'll give you a quick example of without intelligence and with intelligence. The Target breach was probably the second most, impactful from a perception shaping event in the US last year. The first was the firing of the Target CEO. Right, that was a real tipping point. It's not just, let's just blast the CISO again. Let's go get me another one in here for 16 months. Let's take out the top dog. Right, so a lot of organizations were fighting the fight that said, hey, I'm PCI compliant, and you don't really have to worry about it because that's good enough. Focused on things coming in, not things going out. Okay, well, if we can keep them out, then we're good to go. Well, as you saw through, others in the room, there's plenty of ways to get in, so you can't always keep them from getting in. What can you do is to keep their stuff from going out, the ingress, and unlike fire alerts, that was a major thing that they got hammered for. So the fire implementation generates an alert, they didn't action it. Well, you should have done something. The guy had a 1% chance of picking the right one because it's not linked to any context. If you look at an intelligence-led approach to this, it's a completely different game plan. Because well before the breach, which is the X, These tools are out there in the dark web for sale. You can grab and analyze all the different malware they're using. Understand if the guy's capable as a coder, he was. He begins to start expanding the sales of these tools out to adversaries. He actually gets popped and the source code spread out for free. So now everybody's got the same capability from a criminal perspective. They can all weaponize it. Once you get the malware like we have, now you can say, okay, what's the command and control infrastructure? Now you're building out your indicators. So early on in here, who's behind it? Is the code base going to work? Who's buying it? Are those guys capable of executing a criminal act of significance? Yes. So now you've got an analytical wrapper, that knowledge container, and you've got indicators. You've got the command and control, and you've got the associated hashes of the code. When a FireEye alert, or any alert from a technology infrastructure, maps that hash, you pull through the intelligence, voila, that's the 1% you're going to pick that day. Right? So these are avoidable problems with the connection of intelligence to the actual event data. And as you'll see, these things don't pop up overnight. The threat trajectory takes time as these guys are building their capability, building their infrastructure, readying through a reconnaissance mission who they're going to target and for what. And then before it ever hits, if you can pre-position that intelligence knowledge before the events come knocking on the door, you've already got the answer to the question, which 1% do I work on today? Because that's the real risk calculus that we're trying to solve. So the analysts are starting to get this. Rick Allen of Forrester and Robert McMillan and Kelly Kavanaugh are early on, really trying to help people understand and distinguish what's data and what's intelligence. Really key discriminator. So on the intelligence side, Rick's got a good summary there, I won't read it. In terms of the data side, there's very few people that are actually in the intelligence business. It takes an awful lot of time and money. It took us an awful lot of money in 7.5 years to build out the infrastructure, implement an efficient way to manage all of this data. So our big data process and analytics allows for the assessment of what's really important and delivery model to the customer. What the relationship with Checkpoint does is it enables a mainstream deployment of an intelligence-led security approach. Because they had the foresight to build an architecture that would allow you to have third-party best-in-class intelligence provider ingested in line in the back end. So I've got all of the indicators connected to the intelligence repository inside their infrastructure that links back to the intelligence reporting. So now you've got an enabled intelligence-led security approach, and you've also enabled your executive communication and the description of how you're managing risk for your organization. And it's a virtuous cycle of defensibility of why you spent money on that infrastructure and the intelligence inside of it. Get you to the win of the month discussion rather than the 40 million piece of malware you block. So threat data feeds, one-dimensional, all kinds of event data, monitoring command and controls, botnet monitoring, things that could be bad. Tons of false positives in there. Very few people would take a data feed and put it in line in a block mode. When you start connecting the data to the actual intelligence that it relates to, then it all starts coming together. Okay, that's actionable now. Who, what, why, when, where. Then you have enough data to say, do I have a high integrity intelligence provider that has already shrunk the problem, and can I trust that these indicators truly relate to that threat that give me a risk value that says this should be in block mode? We're uploaded in block mode into most of our customers straight away. We've had 2 false positives in 7 years. So the idea is when you get delivered the indicator that maps to the intel, you can rely on it and action it. So inform strategic, operational, and tactical objectives. And naturally, it connects through a variety of different functions and technology platforms to support your efforts. Poster child for the 21st century, I think they got this right. It's not like intelligence is wonderful and technology is not. You now have an opportunity to buy best-in-class technology with best-in-class intelligence fused into it. It's really what the industry's been looking for. So, thank you for your time. Hopefully this was insightful. The one thing I leave you with is change the way you communicate with your executives, extend your shelf life and your value in the organization, and align security with your business. Economics will prevail. Follow the rules of scarcity, and you'll be good to go. Take care, guys.